Hello, my darlings. Pull up a chair and get comfortable, because I have a story for you today that is going to make you want to hug your wallet a little tighter and maybe double-check who has a spare key to your house. It's a story about trust, about family, and about that terrible, sinking moment when the people who are supposed to be your safety net turn out to be the ones cutting the ropes. Our story begins with a young woman named Renee. Now, Renee was the kind of sensible, steady girl every mother hopes to raise. She was 32 years old, living out in Denver, Colorado, and she wasn't one for flashy cars or expensive vacations. No, Renee was a planner. She was a saver. She was the type of person who knew exactly where every single dollar went at the end of the month. You know the type, don't you? The ones who bring their lunch to work in Tupperware containers and make their coffee at home instead of paying $5 for a cup of foam and sugar. Renee had a dream, you see. For 8 long years, she had been putting money away, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. She wasn't saving for a trip to Paris or a fancy new wardrobe. She was saving for a home. A place of her own. She had her heart set on a lovely little craftsman house with a wraparound porch where she could sit and drink her tea on Sunday mornings. She could see it in her mind's eye. She knew exactly what color she was going to paint the kitchen. She knew where she was going to plant her tomatoes. And she was so close, my dears. So very close. She had saved up a nest egg that would make anyone proud. $140,312.67. I want you to remember that number. That wasn't just money in a bank account. That was 8 years of saying no to herself so she could say yes to her future. That was her safety. That was her freedom. It was a Tuesday morning when the world fell out from under her feet. Just 3 days before, on a Saturday, Renee had been at her parents' house, celebrating her father's 60th birthday. Oh, it was a lovely party. There was cake, there were balloons, everyone was smiling and hugging. Her father, Richard, had made a speech about how blessed he was to have such a supportive family. Renee had stood there, clapping for him, feeling proud of her dad, never suspecting a thing. So, on this Tuesday morning, Renee sat down at her desk at work with her coffee, just like she did every single day. She picked up her phone to check her banking app. It was a habit, a little ritual to remind herself how close she was getting to that dream house. She tapped the icon, waited for it to load, and then, she stopped breathing. The screen didn't show $140,000. It showed 0. 0.00. Now, imagine that feeling, honey. It's like missing a step on the stairs in the dark. Your stomach drops right down into your shoes. Renee blinked. She thought maybe the app was glitching. Maybe the internet connection was bad. She closed the app and opened it again. She refreshed the page. 0. Her hands started to shake. And I don't mean just a little tremble, I mean her hands were shaking so bad she almost dropped her coffee mug. Her first thought, of course, was that she had been hacked. Some stranger in a dark room somewhere had stolen her password and wiped her out. We hear about that all the time on the news, don't we? It's a terrible feeling, being robbed by a stranger. She called the bank immediately. You know how it is, sitting on hold, listening to that awful elevator music while your heart is pounding out of your chest like a trapped bird. Every second feels like an hour. Finally, a customer service representative came on the line. A nice young lady, probably sitting in a call center somewhere, just doing her job. Renee tried to keep her voice steady. She said, "I think there's been a mistake. My savings account is empty." The lady on the other end tapped away at her keyboard for a moment. "You can always hear that clicking sound, can't you?" And then she said, "Let me check that for you, ma'am. I see a transfer of $140,312.67 processed yesterday." Renee felt like she was going to be sick right there in her office chair. She said, "I didn't authorize that. I didn't move any money. You have to stop it. You have to reverse it." And then, the lady on the phone said something that changed everything. She said, very calmly, "Ma'am, the transfer was authorized by the co-owner of the account." Renee froze. Co-owner? She had opened that account when she was 17 years old. She was a minor then, so her father had to be on the account with her. But that was 15 years ago. She had forgotten he was even on there. She had been managing that money alone for her entire adult life. He had never touched it. He had never even asked about it. Who? Renee whispered, though she already knew the answer in the pit of her stomach. "The transfer was authorized by Mr. Richard Chapman," the representative said. Her father. The man she had just celebrated on Saturday. The man who taught her how to ride a bike. The man who had sat at the head of the dinner table every night of her childhood. He hadn't just taken a little bit to cover a bill, honey. He had taken it all. He had scraped the bowl clean. Renee sat there, staring at the gray wall of her cubicle, and the room started to spin. It wasn't a hacker. It wasn't a mistake. It was Dad. And in that moment, Renee realized that the man she thought she knew, the man she trusted implicitly simply because they shared the same blood, was a stranger. She hung up the phone, her hand feeling heavy as lead. She looked at that zero on her screen again. It looked different now. It didn't look like an error anymore. It looked like a betrayal. It looked like a theft. And the worst part? She knew exactly why he did it. But we'll get to that. First, she had to hear him say it. She had to hear his voice. She picked up her phone again and dialed her father's number. It rang once. It rang twice. She almost hoped he wouldn't answer, because if he didn't answer, she could pretend for just a few more minutes that there was some other explanation. Maybe he made a mistake? Maybe he clicked the wrong button? But then, the line clicked open. "Hello, Renee," he said. His voice was so calm. So normal. Like he was just sitting in his armchair reading the newspaper. He didn't sound like a man who had just destroyed his daughter's life. And that calmness, my dears, that was the thing that chilled her to the bone. She took a deep breath, clutching the phone so tight her knuckles turned white, and she asked the question that would end the relationship she had known for 32 years. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking just a little. "Where is my money?" Now, my darlings, can you imagine sitting there, holding that phone to your ear, waiting for an explanation that makes sense? Renee's heart was hammering against her ribs like a bird in a cage. She was desperate for him to say it was a banking error, or that he'd moved it to a safer account for her as a surprise. She was practically begging for a lie she could believe. But Richard Chapman didn't offer a lie. He didn't even offer an apology. "Renee," he said, and his voice had that smooth, professional tone he used back when he was managing the bank. "I was wondering when you'd check your app. I suppose we should talk." Renee felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in her office. Talk? Dad, you emptied my account. Every cent. That was my house money. That was 8 years of my life. Why is it gone? Where did you put it? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You could hear the faint sound of a television in the background at her parents' house, probably the morning news. Finally, her father sighed, the way a teacher might sigh at a student who just wasn't grasping a simple math problem. Now, don't get hysterical, Renee. It's unbecoming. We needed it more than you did right now. You have a stable job, a high salary, and plenty of time to earn it back. You're young, honey. You don't have a family to support yet. We had an emergency, and as a co-owner of that account, I made a judgment call for the good of the family. For the good of the family? Renee's voice rose, and she didn't care who in the office heard her anymore. Dad, that wasn't family money. That was my money. I earned it. I saved it. I paid taxes on it. What emergency could possibly justify taking $140,000 without even asking me? And that's when the truth started to leak out, like water through a cracked levee. Her father cleared his throat, and his tone shifted from professional to defensive. It's Derek, Renee. Your brother is in a bit of a bind. One of his real estate ventures, well, the timing wasn't right. The bank was moving to foreclose on his properties, and he was looking at total financial ruin. I couldn't just sit by and watch your brother lose everything, could I? Family takes care of family. That's the rule we've always lived by. Renee felt like she'd been slapped. Derek. It was always Derek. Her younger brother, the one who walked on water in her parents' eyes. Derek was 30 years old, but to her mother and father, he was still the golden boy who just needed one more chance, one more investment, one more handout to finally make it big. So you gave it to him, she whispered. You took my future and handed it to Derek for another one of his guaranteed schemes? I didn't give it to him, Renee, her father snapped, his patience finally wearing thin. I invested it in him. And I used the rest to help him secure a new place to live, a fresh start. He's your brother. You should be happy to help him get back on his feet. Why are you being so selfish? You're sitting on all that cash while your brother is struggling. Selfish. Can you believe the gall of that, my darlings? Calling the person you robbed selfish because they noticed the theft. It's a classic trick, isn't it? Turning the victim into the villain so you don't have to look at your own reflection in the mirror. Renee looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. A strange, cold stillness was settling over her. It was the kind of calm that comes when you finally see something exactly as it is, without the rose-colored glasses of family loyalty getting in the way. She realized that to her father, she wasn't a daughter. She was a resource. She was a backup plan. Dad, she said, and her voice was so quiet it was almost a hum. I want you to listen to me very carefully. That money was for my home. I worked through holidays, I skipped weddings, I lived in a tiny apartment for years to save that. You didn't invest it. You stole it. Now, Renee, watch your mouth, Richard warned. I am a co-owner. Legally, I have every right to move those funds. I don't need your permission, and I certainly don't need your attitude. You should be ashamed of yourself, putting a house, a pile of bricks and mortar, above your own flesh and blood. Your mother is right here, and she's already crying because she can hear how heartless you're being. Renee could almost see it. Her mother, Linda, sitting on the floral sofa, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing her part in the drama. Her mother, who always looked the other way when Derek borrowed money, but was the first to call Renee if she forgot to send a birthday card. "Is Derek there?" Renee asked. "He's busy, Renee. He's trying to rebuild his life," her father replied. "Tell him I hope he enjoys the apartment," Renee said. "And Dad? Tell Mom to save her tears. She's going to need them later." "What is that supposed to mean?" her father asked, his voice sharpening with a hint of genuine worry for the first time. "It means I'm done being the family ATM," Renee said. "And it means you've made a very big mistake." She hung up the phone before he could reply. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there for a moment, listening to the hum of the office around her. For 32 years, she had played by their rules. She had been the good child, the reliable one, the one who never made waves so that Derek could make as many splashes as he wanted. She realized then that her father wasn't just relying on his legal status as a co-owner. He was relying on her guilt. He was counting on the fact that Renee was a good girl who would eventually sigh, cry a little, and then go back to work to earn it all over again because that's what family does. He thought her love for them was a weakness he could exploit forever. But Renee was a data analyst, my dears. She dealt in facts, in patterns, and in hard truths. And the hard truth was that her family had been draining her for years, one emergency at a time. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was the final straw in a decade of exploitation. She opened a fresh spreadsheet on her computer. She titled it Family Contributions, 2016 to 2026. She began to type. $15,000 for a roof. $28,000 for Derek's tuition. $12,000 for medical bills that may or may not have been as bad as they said. $8,000 for a loan to Derek's last business. As the numbers added up, the coldness in her chest grew. She wasn't just losing a house, she was seeing the price tag of her own exploitation. And for the first time in her life, Renee wasn't thinking about how to help them. She was thinking about how to stop them. She picked up her cell phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't called in a long time. Marcus Webb. He'd been her friend in college, a sharp-witted boy who always knew the law inside and out. Now, he was one of the top financial fraud lawyers in the city. She hit call. When he answered, she didn't lead with small talk. "Marcus," she said. "I need to know exactly what the law says about a co-owner forging a signature to move funds into a third-party account. And I need to know it right now." The game was changing, my darlings. Richard Chapman thought he was playing a family drama. He had no idea he'd just started a legal thriller. Now, sugar, to really understand why a father would do something so heartless to his own daughter, we have to go back a bit. You see, the seeds of a betrayal like this aren't planted overnight, they're sown years deep in the soil of a family's history. And in the Chapman house, the soil was tilted in one direction from the very start, straight toward Derek. I want you to picture the Chapman living room back in Denver when Renee and Derek were just children. It was a comfortable home, full of the smell of pot roast and floor wax. On the mantelpiece, there were rows of photographs. There was Renee, smiling in her graduation cap, holding her Dean's List certificate. And right next to it, in a frame twice as big, was a photo of Derek in his Little League uniform, holding a trophy for a game his team didn't even win. That was the theme of their lives, you see. Renee was the steady one. She was the child who finished her homework before dinner, who never missed a curfew, and who started babysitting the neighbors' kids at 12 years old to buy her own school clothes. Her parents would pat her on the head and say, "That's our Renee. We never have to worry about her. She's so strong." But honey, being the child your parents never have to worry about is a lonely road to walk. It means your accomplishments become expected, while your brother's smallest effort is treated like a miracle. Derek was 4 years younger, a charming boy with a crooked smile that could talk his way out of a speeding ticket or a failing grade. While Renee was working 2 part-time jobs to get through college on scholarships, Derek was finding himself. He tried art school, then he tried culinary school, then he decided he was going to be a high-stakes entrepreneur. And every time a new whim struck him, his mother, Linda, would look at Richard and say, "Derek has such potential, Richard. He just needs the right opportunity. He's a dreamer, just like you were." And Richard? Well, Richard saw himself in Derek. He saw the bold, risk-taking man he wished he'd been instead of a bank manager in a beige suit. So, the money followed the dreams. It didn't matter that the dreams always seemed to end in a liquidation sale or a pile of unpaid invoices. Renee remembered a Thanksgiving back in 2018. She had just finished her first year as a senior analyst, and she'd saved up enough to buy herself a nice, reliable car. She was so proud when she pulled into their driveway. But during dinner, the conversation wasn't about her promotion or her new car. It was about Derek's brilliant idea to flip houses in a neighborhood that was clearly underwater. "Renee," her mother had said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You're doing so well. You have so much extra. Don't you think it's only fair to help your brother get his start? Family comes first, after all. We all rise together." That was the phrase they used to pick her pockets, family comes first. But as Renee sat in her office years later, looking at her empty bank account, she realized the phrase was missing a few words. What they really meant was, Renee comes last, so Derek can come first. She remembered when her father had first put his name on that account. She was 17, just a girl with a passbook and a few $1,000s from summer jobs. He'd sat her down in his study, the room smelling of old paper and peppermint. "Renee," he'd said in that soothing, banker's voice, "I'm going to put my name on this with you. Just in case of an emergency. If you're ever stranded, or if something happens to me, I can make sure you're taken care of. It's for your protection, honey." She had looked up at him with all the trust in the world. He was her dad. He was the man who checked under her bed for monsters. Why wouldn't she trust him? She never even thought to remove him when she turned 18, or 21, or 30. It felt like a betrayal of the family first rule to even suggest he shouldn't be there. He made her feel that his presence on her account was a symbol of their bond, rather than a key to her vault. But Derek, oh, Derek knew. He knew exactly where the money was. He'd seen the way their parents looked at Renee's success, not with pride, but with a sort of quiet calculation. Like she was a well-tended garden they could harvest whenever their own cupboards were bare. A few years back, Derek had come to Renee privately. He wanted $10,000 for a surefire crypto investment. Renee had said no. She told him she was saving for a house, and she couldn't risk her future on something so volatile. Derek hadn't yelled. He hadn't gotten angry. He just looked at her with a pitying smile and said, "You're so tight, Renee. You're going to die sitting on a pile of money, and you'll have nobody left who loves you because you wouldn't help them when it mattered." He'd gone straight to their father after that. And wouldn't you know it? A week later, Richard had called Renee, complaining that the roof was leaking and they were short on the repair bill. Renee, the good daughter, had sent the $15,000 without a second thought. She found out months later from an aunt that the roof hadn't been touched, but Derek had been seen driving a brand new motorcycle. That was the pattern, my darlings. A slow, steady erosion of her boundaries. They had spent years grooming her to be the martyr of the family. They praised her for her strength because her strength meant they could be weak. They celebrated her independence because it meant they didn't have to support her. But the one thing they underestimated was Renee's mind. They thought she was just a fountain of money, but they forgot she was an analyst. She was trained to see the anomalies. She was trained to find the hidden debt. And as she sat there, she realized that Derek hadn't just hit a snag in his real estate business. He had likely been hemorrhaging money for years, and her parents had been quietly funneling her contributions into his sinking ship until there was nothing left of their own savings. The $140,000 wasn't just a withdrawal. It was the final heist. They knew Renee was close to buying a house. They knew that once that money was tied up in real estate, it would be out of their reach forever. They had to strike now, or lose their golden goose for good. Renee leaned back in her chair, the green glow of her spreadsheet reflecting in her eyes. She felt a strange sense of mourning. Not for the money, well, not just for the money, but for the father she thought she had. The man in the peppermint-scented study who said he wanted to protect her was gone. In his place was a man who had sat in the dark at 3 a.m., logging into his daughter's life to dismantle her future for a son who couldn't even keep a checkbook balanced. "All right, Derek," she whispered to the empty room. "You want to play at being a big-time investor? Let's see how you handle a real audit." She closed her laptop and stood up. She wasn't going to call her mother. She wasn't going to plead with her father. She was going to do something they never expected the reliable daughter to do. She was going to stop protecting them. Now, my darlings, there is a certain kind of power that comes to a woman when she stops being sad and starts being precise. Renee didn't spend that Tuesday afternoon crying in the bathroom or calling her friends to gossip. No, she did what she was trained to do. She went hunting for the truth. You see, when you're a data analyst, you know that words can be slippery, and emotions can be faked, but the numbers? The numbers are honest. They don't have a favorite child, and they don't hide behind family values. Renee sat back down at her desk and opened a folder on her computer that she'd kept for a long time. It was a private file, one she'd started years ago just to keep track of her budget, but today, it was going to become her primary piece of evidence. She called it the Ledger of Labeled Emergencies. She began to scroll, and as she did, the history of the last 10 years played out in black and white. It was like reading a diary written in dollar signs. She looked at an entry from 2016. She was 24 years old, just starting to feel like she had her head above water. She remembered that phone call from her mother, the sound of her voice trembling. "Renee, the roof is practically falling in on us. The contractor says it's a safety hazard, but your father's retirement fund isn't what we thought it would be. Could you spare a little? Just to keep us dry?" Renee had looked at her modest savings and sent $15,000. As she looked at the receipt now, she did a quick search on the public property records for her parents' home. No roofing permits had been filed in 2016. None in 2017 either. She felt a sharp poke of ice in her chest. Where did that $15,000 really go? She remembered Derek showing up to Christmas that year with a top-of-the-line gaming computer and a new leather jacket. She'd been happy for him then. Now, she felt like a fool. Then there was 2018. The tuition gap. Her mother had cried on the phone for an hour about how Derek was so close to finishing his degree, but his financial aid had been cut. He'll have to drop out, Renee. After all that hard work. He's so depressed, he won't even leave his room. Renee had covered $28,000 over 2 years to keep him in school. She clicked a few links, checked some old emails, and realized Derek hadn't even been enrolled in classes during that final semester. He'd been traveling to find inspiration in Mexico. My darlings, she had funded a 6-month vacation under the guise of an education. One by one, she went through them. The $12,000 for medical bills when her mother had that flare-up. Funny how the insurance statements she'd accidentally seen during a visit didn't reflect any of those costs. The $8,000 loan to Derek's failed real estate startup that was supposed to be paid back in 90 days. It had been 3 years. Not a single penny had returned. Renee's fingers flew across the keys. She wasn't just looking at her bank statements, she was looking at a map of a decade-long con. She added it all up. Between the emergencies, the loans, and the family shares, she had given her parents and Derek a total of $87,000. $87,000. That was on top of the $140,000 they had just stolen. She stared at the total on her screen. Over $200,000 of her life's work had been swallowed up by the Chapman family machine. She had been working for them. She had been their silent partner, their unwilling benefactor, their safety net that they decided to turn into a trampoline. She printed it all out. Every bank confirmation, every Venmo record, every desperate email from her mother pleading for just a little help until next month. She put them into a neat, blue professional folder. She didn't feel like the easy daughter anymore. She felt like a predator who had finally found the trail. But then, she found the one that hurt the most. It wasn't the biggest amount, but it was the most calculated. 2 years ago, she had finally sat her father down and told him she wanted to remove him from her savings account. She'd told him she was getting serious about the house and wanted everything in her own name for the mortgage application. She remembered the way his face had fallen. He hadn't gotten angry. He'd used that quiet, disappointed voice that always made her feel like she was 5 years old and had broken a lamp. "Renee," he'd said, "after 30 years, you don't trust your own father? I've spent my life protecting you. I've never touched a cent of your money. If you feel you need to lock me out, then do it, but I never thought I'd see the day when my daughter treated me like a criminal." She had felt so guilty, so small, that she'd hugged him and apologized. She'd left his name on the account to prove her love. Looking at the empty balance now, she realized that conversation hadn't been about trust at all. It had been about access. He had manipulated her love for him to keep the door unlocked so he could walk in and rob her when it suited him. It was a cold-blooded move from a man who knew exactly which heartstrings to pull. She closed the folder. She had the receipts. She had the history. She had the proof that this wasn't an emergency move, it was the culmination of a life lived at her expense. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and walked toward the elevator. Her coworkers were chatting about their lunch plans, complaining about the rain, living their normal lives. Renee felt like she was walking in a different world. She got into her car and sat there for a moment, the blue folder resting on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. She realized that her father was still expecting her to be the Renee from that conversation 2 years ago. He was expecting the girl who would apologize for being difficult. He was expecting the girl who would value his feelings over her own survival. He was in for a very rude awakening. She pulled out her phone and sent a short, simple text to her mother and father in their group chat. I have finished the audit of everything I have given you over the last 10 years. The total is $87,000, not including the $140,000 you stole yesterday. I am giving you 24 hours to return the full $140,312.67 to my account. If the balance is not restored by 9 a.m. tomorrow, I will be taking this folder to the authorities. This is not a family discussion. This is a demand. She hit send and watched the little bubbles appear almost instantly. They were typing. Then they stopped. Then they started again. Renee didn't wait to read the replies. She put the phone in the cup holder, put the car in gear, and drove away. For the first time in her life, the reliable daughter was the one holding all the cards. Now, sugar, they say that home is where the heart is, but for Renee, home was where her hope lived. After she sent that text, she didn't go straight back to her apartment. She couldn't. The four walls of her rental felt like they were closing in on her, smelling of old carpet and other people's lives. Instead, she found herself driving down a quiet, tree-lined street in a neighborhood just north of downtown. She pulled the car to the curb and killed the engine. There it was. The Craftsman house. It was a beautiful thing, honey. It had that deep, forest green trim and a front porch that stretched wide like an open invitation. It was the kind of house that looked like it had stories to tell, stories about Sunday roasts and children's height marks carved into the doorframes. Renee had toured it just last week. She'd walked through those rooms and felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging. She had already picked out the corner in the living room where her grandmother's old rocking chair would go. She'd spent an hour in the backyard, planning where the rosebushes would sit and where she'd put a little bird bath. That house wasn't just a building to her, darlings. It was the finish line. It was the reward for every double shift, every tuna sandwich lunch, and every time she'd walked past a store window looking at a dress she couldn't justify buying. It was the physical proof that she had made it on her own, without a handout or a shortcut. She sat there in the silence of her car, gripping the steering wheel so tight her hands hurt. She looked at the for sale sign on the front lawn. To anyone else, it was just a piece of wood and plastic. To Renee, it felt like a tombstone. She thought about her father's words on the phone, "It's just a pile of bricks and mortar." Oh, it's easy to say that when you've spent 30 years sleeping under a roof someone else helped you pay for, isn't it? It's easy to dismiss a dream when it's not yours that's being sacrificed. Her father hadn't just taken her money, he'd taken her peace. He'd taken the one thing that made all the struggle feel worth it. He'd handed her dream to Derek, a boy who didn't know the value of a dollar because he'd never had to earn one that stayed in his pocket for more than a week. Renee closed her eyes and she could almost hear the ghosts of her parents' voices from her childhood. "Renee, honey, don't be so sensitive. It's just a toy, let your brother play with it. You're the big sister. You're the strong one." How many times had she heard that? How many toys, how many opportunities, how much of her own light had she dimmed just to make sure Derek didn't feel left behind? And now, at 32 years old, they were still asking her to hand over her toys so the little brother could have his fun. Only this time, the toy was a $140,000 future. She felt a hot, stinging tear roll down her cheek. It was the first one she'd allowed herself all day. It wasn't a tear of sadness, really, it was a tear of mourning. She was mourning the girl who believed that if she just worked hard enough and was good enough, she'd eventually be seen. She was mourning the daughter who thought her father's name on her account was a shield, not a dagger. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a message from her mother. "Renee, please. Your father is so upset. He did this for the family." Derek was in tears, "Honey. He was going to lose everything. How can you be so cold about money when your brother's life is falling apart? We're family. We'll make it up to you, I promise. Just come home for dinner and let's talk like adults." Renee read the words "talk like adults" and almost laughed out loud. Talking like adults, in the Chapman household, meant Renee listening while her parents explained why her needs were secondary. It meant forgiving a debt that would never be repaid. It meant accepting a promise from people who had spent a decade lying to her face about where her money was going. She looked back at the Craftsman house. Someone else was going to buy it. Someone else was going to sit on that porch. Someone else was going to plant tomatoes in that soil. The thought was like a physical weight on her chest. But then, something shifted inside her. The grief didn't go away, but it grew a spine. She realized that if she let them get away with this, she wouldn't just be losing a house. She'd be losing herself. She'd be confirming to them that she truly was nothing more than a resource to be tapped. If she walked into that dinner and talked it out, she'd be spending the rest of her life waiting for the next emergency, the next tuition gap, the next investment opportunity. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the house one last time, not with longing, but with a promise. "I'm going to get my house," she whispered to the empty car. "Maybe not this one. Maybe not today. But I am going to get what belongs to me." She realized that the dream wasn't really the bricks or the mortar. The dream was the independence. And the only way to protect that independence was to stop being the good daughter and start being the wrong person to mess with. Her father thought he was the one in control because he had the account access. He thought he was the one with the power because he held the family card. But he'd forgotten one very important thing. Renee was the one who knew how the systems worked. She was the one who knew how to track every digital footprint, every forged authorization, and every hidden transaction. He had stolen her savings, but he hadn't stolen her mind. And that was going to be his undoing. She put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. She didn't head toward her parents' house. She headed back to her apartment to pack a bag and move her laptop to a secure location. She knew the storm was coming, and she wasn't going to be caught out in the rain this time. She had 20 hours left on her ultimatum. And for the first time in 32 years, Renee Chapman didn't care who was crying at the dinner table. Now, sugar, there's a saying that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. But in Renee's case, she knew she needed a different kind of company. She needed someone who spoke the language of the law with a silver tongue and a heart made of cold, hard steel. She needed Marcus Webb. Renee walked into the lobby of Marcus's law firm in downtown Denver on Wednesday morning, just as the sun was starting to hit the glass skyscrapers. The office was all polished marble and quiet whispers, the kind of place where people come to settle scores that can't be fixed with a handshake. She was clutching that blue folder against her chest like a shield. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that $0 balance staring back at her like a hollow eye. Marcus was waiting for her in a glass-walled conference room that looked out over the mountains. He hadn't changed much since their college days, still had that sharp, observant look in his eyes, like he was solving a puzzle before you even finished speaking. He stood up and pulled her into a quick, firm hug. "Renee," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "You sounded like you were standing in the middle of a house fire on the phone last night. Sit down. Tell me everything, from the very beginning. Don't leave out a single detail, no matter how small or how much it hurts to say out loud." And so, she did. She opened the blue folder and laid out the anatomy of the betrayal. She told him about the birthday party, the Tuesday morning discovery, and the phone call with her father. She showed him the spreadsheet, the 10 years of emergencies that added up to $87,000. And finally, she showed him the bank's confirmation of the transfer. Marcus didn't interrupt once. He just leaned back, his fingers steepled under his chin, listening with a focus that made Renee feel, for the first time in 24 hours, like she wasn't crazy for being angry. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Marcus reached out and tapped the bank confirmation. "He's a co-owner, Renee. You know that makes things complicated, right? In the eyes of the bank, if his name is on the door, he has a key." Renee felt her heart sink. "So he gets away with it? Just because he's my father and I was too trusting to take his name off a paper from 15 years ago?" "I didn't say that," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "I said it's complicated. But here's the thing about keys, Renee. Just because you have a key to the house doesn't mean you have the right to sell the furniture and burn the place down while the other owner is sleeping." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "You mentioned something on the phone about a confirmation email. The bank said the transfer was authorized via electronic signature, right?" Renee nodded. "The representative said it was confirmed on Monday afternoon. I was at work all day, Marcus. I didn't log into my savings account on Monday. I didn't sign anything." Marcus's face transformed. That sharp, lawyerly grin spread across his lips, the one that usually meant someone was about to have a very bad day in court. "There it is. That's the crack in the dam." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Renee, being a co-owner gives him access to the funds, yes. But if he misrepresented himself as you to push a transfer through, if he used your login credentials or forged your digital signature to bypass security protocols, that is no longer a civil family dispute. That is bank fraud. That is identity theft. And in the state of Colorado, for an amount this high, we're talking about a Class 3 felony." Renee felt a wave of dizziness. Felony. Prison. She thought of her father, the bank manager who prided himself on his reputation. The man who wore his Sunday best to church and shook everyone's hand. "Marcus," she whispered. "He's my father. I just wanted my money back. I didn't think about prison." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. His voice was gentle but firm. "Renee, honey, listen to me. He didn't think about you when he sat at that computer. He didn't think about your house, your future, or your hard work. He made a choice to treat his daughter like a victim. You have to decide if you're going to be one." He stood up and started pacing the room. "The bank has a 72-hour window to dispute suspicious transactions before they become confirmed in the system. After that, the money is gone into the wind, and we're chasing ghosts. It's Wednesday morning. You've got less than 48 hours left. What do I do? Renee asked, her voice growing stronger. First, Marcus said, we don't just ask for the money back. We build a cage. You need proof that it wasn't you behind that keyboard. Do you still have friends over at the IT department at your firm? Anyone who knows their way around metadata and IP addresses? Renee thought of Carla. Carla was a genius with digital footprints. Yes, she said. Carla Diaz. She's the best digital forensic specialist I know. Call her, Marcus instructed. Tell her you need a forensic analysis of that authorization email. If we can prove that signature was generated from your father's house while you were at your office, we don't just have a grievance. We have a smoking gun. He picked up a pen and started scribbling on a legal pad. And Renee? Don't answer any more texts from your mother. Don't pick up the phone. They are going to try to drown you in guilt because they know they can't win on the facts. They're going to tell you that you're destroying the family. You remind yourself that he destroyed the family the moment he decided his daughter was a bank account he could loot. Renee stood up. She felt a strange, cold fire burning in her chest. For years, she had been the one making excuses for them. She had been the one smoothing things over. Now, she had a professional telling her that she didn't have to set herself on fire to keep them warm. One more thing, Marcus said as she reached the door. If we go down this road, there's no turning back. Once the police are involved, it's out of your hands. The state of Colorado becomes the one pressing charges, not you. Are you ready for that? Renee thought of the forest green trim on the Craftsman house. She thought of the family first lecture she'd heard while her brother rode away on a motorcycle she'd paid for. I've been ready for 10 years, Marcus, she said. I just didn't know it until yesterday. She walked out of the office, pulled out her phone, and dialed Carla. The reliable daughter was gone. The investigator had taken her place. Now, darlings, if there's one thing you should know about the world we live in today, it's that every time you touch a computer or tap a phone, you're leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. Most people walk through life thinking their secrets are locked away behind a password, but to someone who knows how to look, those secrets are shouting from the rooftops. And luckily for Renee, her friend Carla Diaz was the best listener in the business. Renee met Carla in a small, quiet corner of the cafeteria at Datasphere. Carla was a woman who lived in the world of ones and zeros, a sharp, no-nonsense specialist who could find a needle in a digital haystack while eating a sandwich. When Renee sat down and slid that bank confirmation email across the table, Carla didn't even look up from her screen at first. You look like you've seen a ghost, Renee, Carla said, her fingers dancing across her keyboard. Worse, Renee whispered. I think I've been robbed by one. Carla, I need a favor. A big one. This isn't for work, and it's personal. I need to know where this electronic signature came from. Carla stopped typing. She looked at Renee, really looked at her, and saw the dark circles under her eyes and the way she was white-knuckling her coffee cup. She took the printout, scanned it for a second, and then nodded slowly. Send the original file to my private server. Give me 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Do you know how long 20 minutes feels when your entire future is hanging in the balance, honey? Renee sat there, watching the clock on the wall, listening to the hum of the vending machines. She thought about her father, probably sitting in his study right then, thinking he'd been so clever. He was an old-school banker, he understood interest rates and ledgers, but he didn't understand the footprint he'd left behind. He thought a digital signature was just a box you check. He didn't realize it was a fingerprint. Finally, Carla's phone buzzed. She gestured for Renee to come around to her side of the table. "All right, look here," Carla said, pointing to a string of numbers and letters that looked like gibberish to anyone else. "This is the metadata for the authorization. Every time a document is digitally signed, it records the where and the how. This signature wasn't just a click, Renee. Someone logged into the Mountain West Federal portal using your username and a saved password." Renee felt a sick flutter in her stomach. "He must have seen me log in during one of my Sunday visits. I used his Wi-Fi to check my balance once when the reception was bad." "That's likely," Carla said, her voice dropping. "But here's the clincher. Look at the IP address. Every internet connection has a home address, so to speak. This signature was generated from a residential router in Lakewood, Colorado. I ran the trace. It belongs to a Richard Chapman." Renee closed her eyes. There it was. The smoking gun Marcus had talked about. And the time, Carla? What was the exact time? 3:47 a.m. on Monday morning, Carla said, her face softening with sympathy. "You weren't in Lakewood at 3 in the morning on a work night, were you?" "No," Renee said, her voice trembling. "I was in my bed, in my apartment, 20 miles away. I was sleeping while my father was using my name to empty my life." "There's more," Carla added, clicking another tab. "The device fingerprint shows it was an older desktop running an outdated version of Windows. Does your dad still have that big clunky Dell in his home office?" "Yes," Renee whispered. "He refuses to get rid of it. He says it's the only thing that works the way it should." Carla turned the screen toward Renee. "He forged your digital identity, Renee. He sat there in the middle of the night, while the world was quiet, and he pretended to be you so he could move that money. He didn't just use his co-owner status to walk into the bank, he used fraud to make it look like you were the one giving the money away. He wanted to make it look like a gift so the bank wouldn't flag it as suspicious." Renee felt a cold, hard clarity settle over her. This wasn't a judgment call, like her father had said. This was a calculated, premeditated heist. He'd waited until she was asleep. He'd used a forged signature to cover his tracks. He'd tried to make it look like she was complicit in her own destruction. "I can write this up for you," Carla said, her voice firm. "An official forensic report. I'll include the IP logs, the device ID, and the timestamp. If you take this to the bank or the police, they won't be able to ignore it. This is textbook identity theft." "Thank you, Carla," Renee said, taking a deep breath. "Renee?" Carla reached out and caught her sleeve as she started to stand. "People like this, they don't stop until someone makes them stop. They think family is a shield they can hide behind while they do whatever they want. Don't let him hide." Renee walked away from that table feeling like she was carrying a lead weight in her chest, but her feet were steady. She had the proof. She had the where, the when, and the how. The man who had raised her to be honest had forgotten that she was also raised to be thorough. She walked out into the bright Colorado sunshine and pulled out her phone. She didn't call her dad. She didn't call her mom. She called Marcus. "I have it," she said as soon as he picked up. The IP address, the device, the time. It was him, Marcus. 3 in the morning from his home office. "Good," Marcus said, and she could hear the snap of a folder closing on his end. "Now we have a choice. You can take that report and show it to him, one last time, to see if he'll do the right thing. Or, we go to the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit right now. Which is it going to be, Renee? Renee looked at her reflection in the glass door of the office building. She didn't see the strong girl who always helped. She saw a woman who was tired of being a victim. I gave him my ultimatum yesterday, Renee said. The clock is ticking. But Marcus? I want the police report drafted. I'm not waiting for another lie. The bridge was burning, my darlings. And for the first time in her life, Renee was the one holding the match. Now, darlings, the clock is a cruel mistress when you're waiting for someone to find their conscience. By Wednesday evening, the sun was dipping low behind the Rockies, casting long, jagged shadows across Renee's apartment. She sat at her small kitchen table, the forensic report from Carla and the blue folder from Marcus laid out like a deck of cards she was about to play. The deadline she'd set was 9 a.m. Thursday. She had 14 hours left. Her phone had been buzzing all afternoon, texts from her mother, missed calls from her brother, even a few accidental FaceTime requests from her nieces. It's a common tactic, isn't it? When the wolf is caught, he sends the lambs to do the pleading. But Renee didn't budge. She kept her phone face down, the silence in the room heavy enough to drown in. Finally, at exactly 7 p.m., there was a knock at her door. Not the frantic, pounding knock of an intruder, but a slow, rhythmic, authoritative sound. The knock of a man who still believed he held the lease on his daughter's life. Renee took a deep breath, checked the chain on the door, and opened it. There stood Richard Chapman. He wasn't wearing his usual banker's suit. He was in a windbreaker and khakis, looking for all the world like a grandfather out for a stroll. But his eyes, his eyes were as hard as flint. Behind him, hovering by the stairwell, was her mother, Linda, clutching her purse to her chest like she was expecting a storm. Renee, her father said, his voice dropping into that deep, disappointed register. Can we come in? It's chilly out here, and I think we've had enough of this texting nonsense. Renee didn't step back. She stood in the doorway, a human barricade. The text wasn't nonsense, Dad. It was a demand. Did you bring the transfer confirmation? Richard sighed, shaking his head. Still on about the money. I thought we raised you to have a little more perspective, honey. Your mother hasn't slept a wink. She's been crying for 24 hours because her only daughter is threatening to send her father to jail over a family loan. It wasn't a loan, Renee said, her voice flat. It was theft. And I'm not threatening you, Dad. I'm informing you of the consequences of your own actions. Now, Renee, her mother chimed in, peeking over Richard's shoulder. Think of poor Derek. He's finally getting his life together. He's found a beautiful condo, and he's starting a new consultancy. If you take that money back, you're pulling the rug out from under him. You'd be making your own brother homeless just so you can have a wraparound porch? Is that who you are? Renee looked at her mother, really looked at her. She saw the practiced quiver of the chin, the moisture in the eyes. For 30 years, that look had made Renee crumble. But tonight, it just made her feel tired. If Derek is 30 years old and can't afford a roof without stealing from his sister, then he should be homeless, Renee said. Or he should get a job at the grocery store like I did when I was 16. I am not his mother, and I am certainly not his benefactor. Richard's face flushed a deep, angry red. The kindly grandfather mask was slipping. That's enough. I am the co-owner of that account. I had every legal right to move those funds to protect this family from ruin. You're acting like a spoiled child, Renee. You have a high-paying job. You can save it again. Derek can't. This was an equitable distribution of family assets. Equitable? Renee let out a short, sharp laugh. Is that what you call it? Then tell me, Dad, why did you wait until 3 in the morning to do it? Why did you use my personal login and my saved password to forge a digital signature? If you had the legal right as a co-owner, why did you have to pretend to be me? The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Richard's jaw tightened. He glanced at Linda, then back at Renee. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear crossed his face. He hadn't expected her to know about the signature. He thought she'd just see the empty balance and blame the bank's policies. I don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Renee reached back to the table and picked up Carla's report. She held it up so he could see the IP address and the timestamp. This is a digital footprint, Dad. It leads directly to your home office. It proves you misrepresented your identity to the bank. Marcus calls that bank fraud. The Denver police call it a felony. She leaned in closer, her voice a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You have 13 hours. At 9:01 a.m., if that money isn't back, I am calling the detective Marcus has on standby. I will hand them this report. I will hand them the 10 years of fake emergencies you and Mom used to bleed me dry. And then, Dad, you can explain equitable distribution to a judge. You wouldn't, her mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Renee, you'd destroy our reputation. What would people at the club say? What would our neighbors think? They'll think you raised a daughter who finally learned how to say no, Renee said. Richard stepped forward, his finger pointing at her face. You do this, and you are no longer a part of this family. Do you hear me? You'll be dead to us. No Christmas, no birthdays, no nothing. You'll be alone in that big house of yours with nothing but your money to keep you warm. It was the ultimate threat in the Chapman house, the threat of exile. They thought it was the one card she couldn't beat. Renee felt a tear prick her eye, but she didn't let it fall. She looked at her father, the man she had adored, the man she had trusted with her very future, and she realized that the exile had already happened. He had exiled her the moment he decided her life was worth less than Derek's whims. Dad, she said softly. I've been alone in this family for a long time. At least in my new house, the locks will actually work. She stepped back and closed the door. She heard her mother start to wail in the hallway. She heard her father mutter a curse word she'd never heard him use before. She heard their footsteps retreating down the stairs. She walked back to her kitchen table and sat down. Her heart was racing, and her hands were cold, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. She wasn't the good daughter anymore. She was a woman who knew her worth. She picked up her phone and sent one last text to the group chat. 13 hours. I suggest you start calling Derek. I hear he has a brand new condo he might need to sell. Then, she turned her phone off. She went to her bedroom, laid down, and for the first time since Tuesday morning, Renee Chapman fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Now, my darlings, there is a very specific kind of silence that happens on the morning of a deadline. It's not a peaceful silence, it's the silence of a fuse burning down, second by second. Renee woke up at 6 a.m. on Thursday morning. She didn't need an alarm. Her body knew that this was the day her life would either begin again or change forever. She didn't check her phone right away. She made herself a cup of coffee, the steam rising in the quiet of her kitchen, and she watched the sun climb over the city. She felt a strange, hollow calm. She had done everything she could. The evidence was gathered, the bridge was built, and the match was lit. All that was left was to see if her father valued his freedom more than his pride. At 8:30 a.m., she sat down at her computer. She opened her banking portal and stared at that cold, gray screen. Current balance, $0. She refreshed the page. $0. 8:45 a.m. She felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Maybe she had miscalculated. Maybe her father truly believed he was untouchable. Maybe he thought she was bluffing. She looked at the blue folder sitting on her desk. She had already looked up the address for the Financial Crimes Unit. It was a 20-minute drive. If that balance didn't change by 9 a.m., she was going to put on her coat, get in her car, and end her relationship with her parents officially. 8:55 a.m. Still zero. Renee felt a tear of frustration prick her eyes. "Come on, Dad," she whispered to the empty room. "Don't make me do this. Just for once, do the right thing because it's right, not because you're cornered." 8:59 a.m. Her hand was on the mouse. Her heart was thumping so hard it felt like it was echoing in her ears. She watched the digital clock on the corner of her screen. 8:59 and 30 seconds. 8:59 and 45 seconds. The clock flipped to 9 a.m. Renee clicked refresh. The screen flickered, that little loading circle spinning for what felt like an eternity. And then, the numbers shifted. Pending deposit, $140,312.67. Available balance, $140,312.67. Renee let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 days. She slumped back in her chair, her eyes blurring as she stared at the screen. He'd done it. He'd blinked. Whether he'd pulled the money back from Derek's account, taken out a high-interest loan of his own, or emptied his own retirement, she didn't know. And truthfully, she didn't care. The money was home. A moment later, her phone, which she had finally turned back on, erupted with notifications. There was no "I'm sorry." There was no "we love you." There was only a single, blistering email from her father's private address. "The money has been returned. I hope you're happy. You have successfully crippled your brother's future and broken your mother's heart. Do not call us. Do not come to the house. We are changing the locks today, and I am having my name removed from that account immediately. Consider yourself an only child from this day forward. I hope that house is worth the price of your family." Renee read the words twice. Any other time in her life, an email like that would have destroyed her. She would have been on her knees, begging for forgiveness, offering to give half back just to stop the hurting. But today? Today, the words felt like a graduation certificate. He was still trying to blame her. He was still calling her the house-hungry villain instead of acknowledging that he was the thief. And in that moment, Renee realized that the family he was mourning was a fantasy. A real family doesn't loot your life to pay for a sibling's mistakes. A real father doesn't forge his daughter's name in the middle of the night. She didn't reply to the email. She didn't need the last word. The balance on her screen was the only word that mattered. She picked up her phone and called her real estate agent, Sarah. "Sarah?" Renee said, her voice steady and clear. "It's Renee Chapman. Is the Craftsman House on 4th Street still available? I'd like to move forward with a full cash offer today. No contingencies. There was a pause, then Sarah's excited voice came through the line. Renee! I was just about to call you. Another offer came in this morning, but if you can do cash and a quick close, I know the sellers will take yours. Are you sure? That's a big move. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Renee said. She hung up the phone and looked around her cramped apartment. She saw the boxes she'd already started to pack. She saw the blue folder. She picked up the forensic report, the one that proved her father's guilt, and she walked over to her shredder. One by one, she fed the pages in. She didn't need them for the police anymore. She didn't need them for revenge. She kept only one thing, the printout of the $140,000 balance. She tucked it into her purse, grabbed her keys, and walked out the door. As she drove through the streets of Denver, the city looked different. The mountains looked sharper. The air felt cleaner. She wasn't the reliable daughter or the family ATM anymore. She was a homeowner. She was an independent woman. And most importantly, she was a person who had finally learned that you can't keep people in your life who only love you for what they can take from you. She pulled up in front of the green Craftsman House. The sun was hitting the porch just right. She walked up the path, stood on that wide wooden deck, and took a deep breath. She could almost smell the tomatoes she was going to plant. She could almost hear the quiet Sunday mornings she was going to enjoy. Her father had asked if the house was worth the price of her family. As Renee looked at the sold sign being placed in the yard an hour later, she had her answer. Peace of mind isn't just worth a pile of bricks and mortar, honey. It's worth everything. And so, my darlings, Renee got her house. She lost a father, but she found her backbone. And sometimes, in this big, messy world, that's the best trade a woman can make. Now, darlings, time has a funny way of healing what's broken, but it also has a way of showing you that some things were better off staying in pieces. It was a crisp, golden Saturday afternoon, exactly 1 year since the day Renee had signed the papers on her Craftsman House. She was standing on her front porch, wearing an old pair of gardening gloves and a smudge of dirt on her cheek. The wraparound porch was no longer a dream, it was real, and it was covered in pots of vibrant red geraniums and a sturdy wooden swing that didn't creak when you sat on it. She had spent the last 12 months pouring her heart into this place. Every room was painted exactly the color she wanted. There was no one to tell her she was being too picky or too selfish. In this house, Renee's word was law, and her peace was protected. She walked down the steps to her garden, the very spot she'd pointed out to herself that first day. The tomatoes were coming in beautifully, heavy and ripening under the Colorado sun. As she worked the soil, her phone chimed inside the house. A year ago, that sound would have made her heart race with dread. She would have expected a crisis, a demand, or a guilt trip. But today, she didn't rush. She finished pruning her rosebushes, pulled off her gloves, and walked inside to the sun-drenched kitchen. She picked up her phone. It was a notification from a social media site, one of those people you may know or suggested memories. She rarely checked in on her family's lives anymore, but today, a photo caught her eye. It was a picture of Derek. He wasn't in a high-rise condo or standing in front of a fancy office. He was standing in front of a modest, slightly run-down apartment complex, looking older and a lot less polished than he used to. The caption read, "Starting over. Again. Thanks to Mom and Dad for always having my back." Renee looked at the photo for a long moment. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel a need to gloat. She just felt a profound sense of relief that his starting over was no longer her financial responsibility. She had heard through the grapevine that her parents had been forced to downsize. Her father's pride wouldn't let him admit why, but the neighborhood gossip was that they'd taken out a massive home equity loan that they couldn't quite keep up with. They still hadn't called her. No Christmas cards, no birthday wishes. And you know what, sugar? Renee was okay with that. She had learned that blood is thicker than water is only half the saying. The full version is, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means the bonds you choose to make, the people who actually respect and protect you, are the real family. And Renee had found that family. Later that afternoon, her doorbell rang. It was Marcus and Carla, carrying a box of pizza and a bottle of sparkling cider. They'd become her Saturday regulars, the people who helped her paint the guest room and debated the best way to keep squirrels out of the bird feeder. Happy house-iversary, Renee! Carla cheered, stepping into the hallway. I brought the cider, and Marcus brought the legal gossip. I did not, Marcus joked, though he was already pulling a folder of paperwork from his bag. Okay, maybe just one tiny update on the new bank regulations. But mostly, I'm here for the pepperoni. They sat out on the porch as the sun began to set, the mountains turning a deep, royal purple in the distance. They talked about work, about travel, and about the future. For the first time in her adult life, Renee wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was just home. As her friends laughed and the shadows grew long across the lawn, Renee looked at the keys sitting on the side table. They were her keys. To her house. Bought with her money. She thought back to that Tuesday morning at her desk, staring at the zero balance. She remembered the cold fear and the crushing weight of the betrayal. It had been the hardest year of her life, but it had also been the most honest one. She had lost a father who stole, but she had gained a woman who wouldn't let herself be robbed again. She took a sip of her cider and leaned back in the porch swing, listening to the gentle rhythm of the chains. The reliable daughter had finally done something for herself, and as it turned out, the world didn't end. In fact, for Renee Chapman, the world was just beginning. And that, my darlings, is the real story of the American granny. We look out for our own, we hold our ground, and we never ever let someone mistake our kindness for weakness. Good night, my sweet ones. Sleep tight, and remember, keep your heart open, but keep your bank passwords to yourself.